Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Monday edition of our Next Gen Nurses free webinar series. My name is Jennifer Bonner. If you've been with our series for a while, you know me. I've been a nurse for 15 years. I'm a certified nurse midwife, and I love working with students. So I serve as the tutor team lead here at Archer Review. And so a lot of what I do is working one-on-one with students, whether that's private tutoring or working through emails where you're struggling with, I'm not sure what to do next, or what do I choose to study, or I've been unsuccessful. So now what? What's my next step? So, regardless of where you find yourself in the nursing spectrum, whether you're getting ready to head into nursing school, whether you're in the thick of it, you're probably headed into spring break if you're not on spring break already, and kind of feeling that, oh man, I can breathe just a little bit. Or maybe you're at the end of one of your classes and the stress is high and you're like, I don't know which end is up at this point. Wherever you are, we're so glad that you're here. We are more than just test prep. And today we're coming at you with some information on resume do's and don'ts. Because whether you have been in the industry before, maybe you've been a CNA, or maybe you've been in a different area of business. Like, I don't know, maybe you worked at a restaurant or some other entity in the community in which you live. Resumes are a big part of how our world works, right? But when we're ready for that professional job, that first big step into our nursing professions, we really want to show up and we want to show out just a little bit. So today I have two amazing women that are here with me here at Archer Review. I have Whitney and Amanda, and I'm going to give them just a minute to introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of go into what to expect from today.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. My name's Whitney Isola. I'm the president of operations here at Archer Review, and my background is actually as a registered dietitian. I've worked in community hospital settings, multidisciplinary medical practices, and in clinical and operations leadership for a major health system in New York City. I definitely can speak to this topic today from the management side of things. I've definitely hired for hundreds of roles throughout my career, and I've also been early leadership in a few sort of entrepreneurial ventures, small companies, advised small companies and small teams. So happy to be here today to talk to everybody.
We are so glad to have you, Whitney. Thank you so much. All right, Amanda, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Amanda Joy Simmons. I'm the Director of People and Culture at Archer Review. So I do a lot of, I say it's like HR, but more fun. So I'm very familiar with the HR side of things. I've seen a lot of resumes, and in my experience reviewing resumes, I've seen a lot of the don'ts as well as the do's. So happy to share some tips for what helps you stand out from the resume pile.
Awesome. We are so glad to have both of you. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us and to share your expertise. I know our students and myself, we're going to learn so much from you. So, like I was saying earlier, when we enter our resume into whatever job it is that we're looking for, maybe in your situation, it's your first nursing job, or we know that here at Archer Review, we're here across the lifespan of the nurse, right? Maybe you are getting ready for your first NP job. Maybe you're studying for your NP boards. And so this is our first introduction really to our future or potential employer. So we want to make sure that when we submit that resume, that it's done well. And so during our time together, we're going to chat with these experts in our field about, okay, what are some ways that we can level up our resume? What are some things that we should stay away from, and maybe some things that we should pay more close attention to? So if you have questions as we're going, please don't hesitate to throw those in the chat for us. If you are joining us on Facebook or YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, please go ahead and put those in the chat, and we will go through those as we go and as these ladies share their thoughts. So our first question is, what are the must-have sections on the nursing resume? So we know that we have, your name and your address and your phone number. How do we contact you if we are interested? But what other sections would you recommend adding to the resume? Um, let's start with you, Whitney.
Sure, yeah, I'll kick things off. Um, so first, I mean, Amanda may have a different opinion than this, but my thoughts on in terms of like including your address and location is that certainly city and state is important. You don't necessarily need to feel like you have to put your personal address out there, but especially for healthcare, since there can be, requirements for proximity to location and call times and things like that, I do think that having some level of grounding and insight into that is helpful. In terms of contact information, I think it's really important to have a professional email. I know that sounds like very, silly advice, but if your contact email is like, you know, August Sweetie 333, it's like that's not that immediately doesn't reflect very well on you. So just make sure that you do have some sort of email address that is professional and appropriate and reflective of your name. Another kind of small, well, what may seem small, but is actually really huge mistake that I see a lot of times is the naming convention for the file. Like, please submit, ideally a PDF file, because that way, the formatting isn't going to get totally screwy on you and it is going to reflect what you think you're turning over. But don't name the file like if you have three different types of resumes for different types of work settings, like don't put that in the title of the thing so that it's very clear that you're like only, um, giving the resume that's for that type of topic. And do make sure that your name is included because it's amazing how many files come across that just say like resume one, resume three, like so those are just some like basic tips. In terms of categories, I think education, professional licenses and credentials with numbers and with, any relevant state or jurisdiction details so that because a lot of that information is public record and can be looked up and validated. And so I think just kind of like having it all organized in one place only helps. Maybe you don't need it right up front, but the hiring manager probably has to go ahead and screen for all of those things. So having it organized for them. And then, work experience and any professional organizations that you might be a part of or any publications that you might have contributed to. Um, in my opinion, you don't need references right on the resume. That can always be provided afterwards, and you probably want to be giving relevant references for the type of work setting anyways. So those are some of my thoughts on this.
I think those are great thoughts. A lot of times we have generally gone into this situation with a preconceived idea of what this resume should look like, right? We need to add our references because that's what somebody already always tells us to do. But nobody gives us those nitty-gritties about what does it look like on the hiring individual's side? What kind of file have we provided? What kind of email? Because this is just our day to day. But you're right. I think that's a great point, is making sure that our email reflects who we want to be seen, or how we want to be seen in that professional space. Amanda, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Whitney, and I was going to make the same comment about having a professional email. Recommend using your name or your initials, some combination of numbers, and then ideally like a Gmail or other recently used email provider. Do not use an at AOL.com email because that tells me maybe you haven't checked your email for 20 years or so. So that's a great tip just to get started. I agree also about putting your city and state, but you don't necessarily need your home address. You may have to fill that in on an application form, but you don't have to have it on your resume. I recommend not putting a photo on your resume. That is common in some places, generally other countries, but a lot of hiring managers in America do not want to see a photo. That can introduce a level of unconscious bias that doesn't need to be there. So unless you're applying for a job where your photo is relevant, like a modeling job, no photos on resumes. And I'm of the opinion that you don't need irrelevant hobbies on your resume. Sometimes people will have a little section for hobbies. Now, if you have volunteer work that is in some way related to what you're applying for, great, add that. But if you like to crochet or go skiing or you have 6 dogs, we can find that out later after I hire you. You don't have to put that on the resume. As far as sections, you want to make sure that you have your important words at the top and at the bottom because sometimes a hiring manager is just skimming your resume very quickly. So don't overwhelm them with tons of tiny text. Have it be a readable font with your most important words or phrases, very easy to see. A clean format is sometimes even more important than the words on there because if it's hard to read or there's 7 pages of bullet points, we're not going to read it all. So try to keep it clean. If you use a template, which is a great idea, you can find templates in Word or Google Docs. Just make sure that you fill in your information on the whole template and don't leave any of those little placeholders. I've seen that a couple of times. And I agree with Whitney's tip to always save as a PDF because that will keep your formatting intact when the hiring manager downloads it or views it in their applicant tracking system. So those are some of the just kind of tips for the resume overall. And then as far as sections, you want to have generally, you'll go through your job history and a couple bullet points each. And make those bullet points about your impact in the role, not just rehashing your job description. So if you won an award or you increased something by some percentage, anytime you can add numbers that are true and relevant, that's great, as opposed to just listing out the same things people would find in your job description.
Those are great thoughts. Thank you so much. And I think a lot of times we forget here at Archer Review, we work with students all over the world. I have recently gotten several emails about students who are getting ready to take the NCLEX. They have graduated nursing school in some other country. And so, yeah, it is very important that we understand, hey, when you're looking for a job in this area, and vice versa. Sometimes we have students that are wanting to work in other countries. And so it's really important that we understand what is being looked at, where we are applying for. Excellent, excellent thoughts. Thank you so much. All right. So when we are looking at just organizing our resume, what kind of format would you suggest? Would you think more chronological, more functional, just the highlights? I know you touched on this just a minute ago, Amanda, about, kind of give me those bullet points. I want to see something that I'm not going to find somewhere else. So what are your thoughts on just the overall organization of that resume?
I think chronological is your most standard, where you start with your most recent job history and work down to less recent. But certainly there are other ways to format it. And I am not an expert on nursing resumes per se, so I'm interested to hear from y'all if you think for nursing specifically there might make more sense to combine functional things or more relevant experience and put that at the top.
Yeah, no, I agree that chronological still kind of is a best practice. You can kind of see somebody move throughout their career by following a chronological order, and sometimes it can be difficult to kind of like ground somebody's experience if things get super out of order. So I agree with Manda that kind of starting with your most recent and then working backwards is good. I think that, sometimes it makes sense to combine functional roles, like, for example, specific to nursing. If somebody's doing like travel nursing contracts for maybe 2 or 3 years of their career, it would probably be good to bucket that under one sort of subheading about travel nursing and like maybe the why behind that experience, and then listing like some of those contracts because you did have maybe 3, 4, 5 employers over the course of 2 or 3 years and a lot of different types of potential like settings in terms of exposure to different sized critical care units and different types of, um, patient populations. And so that's relevant. But if it's all just kind of splayed out chronologically without grounding it in the idea of travel nursing, then it might just look like you dart around jobs wise for a while, and it might not kind of tell the whole story. So I think there are some sort of like functional elements that you can be thinking of in terms of like how do you ground the narrative. With healthcare in particular, I am a fan of like when you're putting a certain hospital or health system or practice setting, just doing a one-liner right underneath that's like 395 bed community hospital, like, focus was med surge or telemetry or, just because for the person scanning the resume, I think it like very quickly orients them to exactly what type of experience you have had in healthcare. And, people don't always, there might be some big names that people are aware of, but for the most part, there's so many different types of practice settings and hospitals and health systems and whatnot that like a quick little one-liner can be helpful. And then, I mean, I agree with Amanda's assessment that you really just want to be focusing on, you know, what did you help accomplish and contribute to the team? Like, you can pretty quickly and easily speak in an interview to like various types of tasks completed, but if you can speak to cross-functional work, performance improvement mindset, quality outcomes, or even just showcase a couple of soft skills, like, maybe some work contributing to like a bereavement room in the hospital or things like that. Like those are just little tiny gems that kind of showcase that you're very aware of everything beyond just like the day-to-day responsibilities.
For sure. And we have someone on YouTube that's asking, what if it's been a lull? So what if I had a lull in between jobs, maybe a 5 year span? I know of students or even other nurses that I've worked with that maybe they had to take time off to care for, a sick parent or an aging parent, or maybe they became a parent themselves and took some time off in order to give attention to that area of their life. What is your recommendation for explaining that, especially when we're looking at that chronologically listed experience? What's your recommendation? Do you feel like there should be attention drawn to that to explain it, or do you feel like they should wait and see if it's asked about? What are your thoughts there?
I've seen it listed as a career break or something along those lines, or caregiving. In this case, if what you were doing while you were on a break from the professional world is relevant, there were some relevant caregiving skills in there, it's fine to list that. I don't think you have to draw attention to it though, and it kind of depends how long of a span of time we're talking about and how much of your pre-break time you want to bring into the resume. So if you have 20 years of work history and you were home with your children for 2 years, I don't think you really even need to mention that on a resume because you have plenty of other work history. But if there's a gap that would cover a significant portion of the years that your resume is covering, it might be good to just explain that very briefly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I don't think you necessarily need to feel that you have to call it out. If it's recent enough and you feel like there is a little bit of a glaring gap, kind of indicating that, or potentially even just including a sentence or two in a cover letter to help explain that,
Mhm.
could be an approach. But yeah, let the hiring manager kind of like figure it out, because that's not necessarily like that scary when you're reviewing resumes if somebody's really checking a lot of the boxes in terms of like skill set that's necessary. That's worth exploring.
For sure.
Yeah.
I know for a lot of our students, when you're really wanting that job, I know I hear this a lot from labor and delivery applicants that they're like, I really want this job and I know that it's really competitive and I don't want them to throw me away because of this particular situation. And so I think, it's good to think through understanding, yep, I see that there is this gap there and that, that could maybe throw some thoughts out there. So just making sure that we're honest about that time away, that we don't try to fill it in so it doesn't look like that, but just being honest and upfront about what that looks like. So we're moving on a little bit to more practical parts of the information that's in the resume. So what's the best way to highlight clinical experience as a new grad when we don't necessarily have the typical nursing experience that you would have if you were moving within? So if I was a labor and delivery nurse and I'm wanting to move over to the ER, then obviously I have some clinical experience. And I also have someone on Instagram that's saying, should I only include my nursing work experience? What about non-nursing work experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that including other types of work experience is totally appropriate. You don't if it doesn't really feel like it adds to your professional toolbox, then, you may not have to include it. But if you do have, relevant experience, I'm just like thinking of myself, like before I got into the working world, I worked at a nonprofit that focused on young adult cancer survivors. There were a lot of skills from that were transferable to my professional healthcare career. And that was just like a job during college. And so, I did include that in my resume for probably the first 2 years or 3 years of being in the workforce. And then as I gained real workforce experience, like those things dropped off. So don't feel the need to include everything forever, and definitely sort of, begin to be more succinct with your older work experience as your career grows and you get more and more experience that you can speak to. But I don't think it's inappropriate to include like other types of work experiences and just kind of highlight what skills you've gained from those and like how that makes you a more well-rounded professional. Um, and then just in terms of being a new clinician, I mean, I think that it's totally appropriate to have a bullet in in your in your resume, maybe under with some of your clinical training. I say, you can give your location for clinical training. You can give an example of all of the different types of units that you were a part of or got to see. And that can sort of just at least help the hiring manager understand that you have, seen XYZ throughout your training. Everyone starts somewhere. It's okay.
Yep, I agree. Like transferable skills are what you want to highlight when you're talking about experience that isn't specifically relevant to the job that you're applying for. But anything that you learned or did there that you can then bring to a nursing role or whatever role you're applying for, you can highlight that. And also, like Whitney said, fewer bullet points for the irrelevant jobs, even if they're in the middle of your career progression. You want to really focus on the experience you have that's relevant to the role you're applying for. So if say you had a nursing job and then you were a server in a restaurant for a little while and then you went back to nursing, that might be a time when you want to structure your resume functionally so that the focus on page one is on those nursing roles and other work experience maybe is on page two in just a couple lines. And also your cover letter is a great opportunity to highlight any relevant experience or skills that you have that may not come across so quickly in the resume.
Whitney, I love that you said everyone starts somewhere. I tell our students all the time, whether it's our 3-day live or at our private tutoring sessions, everybody gets really excited and they're like, "Oh man, you guys have, you're here." And really, we've all been in this same situation. We've all been in this spot where we're submitting that resume, fingers crossed, hoping that this is the job for us. And, something that I'd like to highlight is, Whitney does a lot of that. Most of that here at Archer Review is going through those resumes. And even Whitney was at one point submitting that resume with the hopes of getting that job. So One thing I want to encourage students, or if you're in the nursing profession, is don't forget that we've all been there, whether it's the hiring manager or it's the CEO at the top of the company. We have all been in those initial spots of submitting that resume and learning a lot of times through mistakes of what does this look like. So for sure, just like Manda said, take those opportunities that you have that were outside of the nursing profession and show them how you bring that knowledge, what you gained from there, and how you can use it in order to enhance who you are as a nurse and to bring that to the company that you're hoping to join. I think those are great thoughts and very encouraging. So
I
we've done a couple of these. Oh, sorry, Whitney.
sorry, I actually have
That's
one
okay.
more thought now that I'm thinking about clinical and healthcare. Academia is kind of its own other animal completely, subsidiary to the healthcare industry. And so especially if you're kind of starting out, I would actually recommend keeping two files, like a resume that is a 1 to 2 pager that is very clearly and succinctly explaining your experiences and who you are, and sort of telling that professional narrative, from the 10,000 foot view, and then keeping a CV where you write down like every presentation, every publication, every little project that maybe like a really compelling, QAPI initiative for the hospital, et cetera. And not that you're necessarily going to submit that CV, you know, left and right. I know that it is a little bit more common if you're going for an academic role as opposed to a clinical role. But at the very least, you can kind of like scan it right before an interview and be like, oh, yeah, I've been doing all of this incredible work over the years. And like, I forgot about half of it. But like, these are good things for me to be talking, like speaking to during the interview. So I've never done that. I don't have a
I
CV. I've forgotten like almost all of the things that I've done in my career. If it didn't get memorialized on LinkedIn like 5 years ago, it's out of this brain.
right? That's a problem.
Yeah.
Um, So one of our students, let me get back there, Raquel, she says, nursing's my second degree. I graduated with a BBA in 1995. Should I include this? And would this create an age bias? So just from my standpoint, I think, how can you draw that to what it is that you're wanting to do? Um, showing that, you know what, you're still continuing in our career. I know when I was working in the college setting, I had a student that was actually in her 80s that was graduating with her nursing degree. And that is absolutely commendable because let me tell you, there was a lot of difference in between her and some of those younger students. And she was a great reference to encourage those students and kind of bring along her expertise. What are your thoughts?
My thought is you don't need to put the year that you graduated on your resume. So, yes, if you have education, put it on your resume, don't put the year. Sometimes, as you're applying for a job, you have to go through an applicant tracking system, and that form may require you to input specific years. But if it's not asked for and required, I would just leave that off.
Yeah. I mean, I will say too, you don't actually know what like they're hiring for. Sometimes, longer experience may be more favorable, sometimes less so. Um, I agree that you don't have to include dates for your education. Like the completion of a program is the most important thing. Um, but at the same time, if you did happen to, like, it's okay. You are who you are, and the the hiring manager is going to be able to sort of parse out your relevant experience regardless.
Mhm. Now,
Awesome
if you have a
thoughts.
certification or something that you want to demonstrate that it's recent, that you're up to date on things, then by all means put the year. But if you have an older degree that you don't want to draw attention to the fact that you earned it 10 years ago, then just leave that year off.
Amanda, I don't know if you have a spidey sense or what, but we have a student, Doris, who just asked, is it appropriate to add a skill you've acquired from workshops without having a certification to back that up? So like BLS, so basic life support, ACLS, things like that.
Yeah, a lot of people will put a skills section on their resume. And granted, I look at a lot more like technical resumes and things like that. But maybe it's a little box over on the side that just bullet points skills. And that's a great place to highlight things like that, that you don't necessarily have a certification or a degree in those things, but you could say with confidence, like, I have that skill. What I don't recommend doing that I have seen is people rating their skills with like a 5-star rating, but then they'll put another skill and rate it only 3 stars. Don't do that. If you have a skill, list it. If you don't have the skill, don't list it.
That is an interesting tactic.
Yeah.
So we just have a few minutes left, but one thing that I want to leave off with, and we've done this in the past when we've talked about the interview process, but it's really great to get some different input. So when we're actually interviewing, what makes a candidate stand out to you? Because as we get that the initial thought of, okay, I'm going to interview for this job. I'm really excited. It's my first one. I don't want to mess it up. What are some things that we can do to just make ourselves stand out?
I mean, I would say prepare. Know the company that you're interviewing for, know the patient population, know a little bit about the encatchment area, if it's a hospital or health system, like some of, their typical patient profile or services that are offered at that location. And, prepare at least 3 to 5 questions. Including having the question like, what does success in this role look like? Or what are some things I can do in the first 6 months in this role that's going to help, contribute to the team or things like that. Just coming in prepared, even if your questions get somewhat answered throughout the interview process, it's very clear when you're interviewing, like who has done their research or who has prepared at least a few grounded questions versus who hasn't. And other than that type of stuff, it's like you're just going to be yourself and answer the questions, right? So I don't know. That would be my 2 cents.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. Being prepared goes a long way. Coming in with a positive attitude, just, smiling and being confident in yourself is helps you stand out. And then this is maybe old-fashioned advice, but just the follow-up. It used to be like back in the day, you would send a letter or a basket of cookies to the hiring manager. Don't do that. But just a quick email to the hiring manager or whoever interviewed you to say, thanks for your time. And then maybe just remind them of, 1 or 2 lines about how you're a great fit for that role and you're looking forward to the next steps. You'd be surprised how many candidates don't do that and miss that opportunity to make another connection with the interviewer.
For sure. I remember when I was working in the OBGYN clinic, we had a nurse who came in, she interviewed. She did a great job. We were, kind of still going through the pile. And I think it was the next day she came in, dropped off a handwritten note of thank you for for the opportunity and just saying, I'm looking forward to the possibility of working in this team and here's why. And that just went so far for us. The fact that it was handwritten. Yes, in a day and age where things get sent, via email, yes, I think that's totally appropriate, but it just gave it an added flair. And it wasn't the fact that she dropped it off, it was the fact that it was handwritten. She took the time to put that just to, her show her gratitude for just the time. So as a matter of gratitude, thank you, Whitney. Thank you, Amanda, so much for joining us. You brought such a wealth of information to myself, and I'm sure our students as they are just raving from um, just their gratitude of the information that you provided. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, students, for joining us this morning. So remember, we are more than just test prep. We are actually here cheering you on in whatever stage of your nursing path you're in. If you are getting ready to enter the world of nursing school, we have amazing prep for you in our pre-nursing. Nursing school has been out for several months, and I have heard I've received emails from students just raving about how impactful the information has been. And I had one the other day that said, "You saved me from the dreaded pharmacology." Just that impact that we have being able to explain, break down some difficult concepts. PN, RN, if you're getting ready to take your NCLEX, we're here for you. And remember, we are here to celebrate your successes. We're here to walk with you through the trenches of those difficulties too. So if you're struggling, if you're not sure where to start, please don't hesitate. Send us an email at nclextutors@archerreview.com. It actually comes to us. We respond individually to those, and we want to support you wherever you are. If you're getting ready to take your NP boards, we have a space for you. Wherever you are, you have a spot here at the Archer Review family. We delight in walking alongside you and celebrating those small and those big successes. Thank you guys so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you back on Wednesday for our next edition of our free webinars. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful day. Thanks,
Thank
Whitney.
you.
Thanks, Manda.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Jennifer.